A lonely police officer was patrolling the rain-slick streets of Brookhaven when he heard a faint whimper behind a dumpster. Curious, he stepped into the alley and froze. There, curled beside a trash bin, was a starving German shepherd shielding two shivering puppies with her frail body. No leash, no collar, no name, just three souls abandoned in silence. He bent down, and the mother didn't growl. She simply looked up, eyes pleading as if whispering, "Please, help us." He didn't know it yet, but this moment would unravel a criminal empire, heal a shattered heart, and give birth to a family bound not by blood, but by love. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, tell me where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Rain tapped steadily on the windshield like soft fingers trying to be heard. The streets of Brookhaven, a small, aging town tucked deep in Washington state, were slick with autumn drizzle. Streetlights flickered against the fog, casting blurred halos on cracked sidewalks. Officer Ethan Cole, 35 years old, steered his patrol car slowly through the near-empty streets. It was nearly midnight, and Brookhaven slept, save for the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional shuffle of a raccoon darting across alleyways. Ethan had grown used to the silence. Since his wife, Melissa, passed in a car accident 2 years ago, he found comfort in routine patrols, paperwork, and the solitude of his modest home on the edge of town. He was tall, lean, with short dark brown hair starting to gray at the temples. His eyes, a stormy gray, often looked distant, like they were always somewhere else. He was known for being fair, quiet, and dependable, the kind of officer who never raised his voice but always got things done. On this particular night, as the rain grew heavier and wind curled down narrow alleys like a whisper, Ethan's radio crackled softly with the voice of dispatch reporting a minor noise complaint 3 blocks away. He was about to respond when something else caught his attention, a sound that didn't come from the speaker, a faint whimper. He pulled the patrol car to a stop beside an old abandoned hardware store, its windows boarded up, graffiti scrawled along the walls. The noise came from behind the building, somewhere in the alley choked with trash bins and broken pallets. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, stepped out into the drizzle, and approached with quiet, deliberate steps. As he turned the corner, the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, and there it was. Curled beside an overfilled dumpster was a German shepherd, her ribs visible beneath a patchy sable coat soaked in rain. She lay protectively around 2 tiny pups, one darker and slightly larger, the other frail, its head barely lifting. All 3 were caked in grime and mud, but none showed fresh wounds. What stopped Ethan in his tracks, however, was their eyes. The mother's eyes met his, wide, tired, but still burning with a fierce protectiveness. She didn't growl, but her lip curled ever so slightly when he took a step forward. Ethan lowered to a knee, careful not to make sudden movements. "Hey, girl," he said gently. "You're not supposed to be out here alone, huh?" The rain soaked through his uniform as he scanned the scene. No collar, no leash, no food, just a makeshift bed of damp cardboard. The larger pup male, he guessed, tried to bark but only managed a hoarse squeak. The smaller one shivered violently, snuggled against the mother's belly. Ethan noticed something else. The mother's hind leg bore a faint old scar, long since healed but clear against her damp fur. She must have been a working dog once, or perhaps just unlucky. He took off his jacket and slowly laid it on the ground in front of them. The mother hesitated. Then, as if surrendering to exhaustion, rested her head down, eyes never leaving his. "All right," Ethan murmured. "Let's get you home." The German shepherd's name would come later. For now, Ethan wrapped the puppies in the jacket, cradling them gently. The mother, too weak to walk far, was carried to the back of the patrol car with effort. She didn't resist, only gave a low grunt when Ethan accidentally bumped her side. Back at his house, a modest 2-bedroom near the woods, Ethan made a bed from old towels and heated blankets by the fireplace. He wasn't used to having company, especially not the four-legged kind. But watching the mother curl protectively around her pups in the glow of the fire, something unfamiliar stirred in him, a sense of responsibility that felt heavier than his badge. It was close to 3 a.m. when the phone rang. Deputy Lila Henderson, 29, sharp-tongued but brilliant, was on the other end. "You up?" "Barely," Ethan replied. "Another missing dog, fourth one in 2 weeks, this time from near the old warehouse district. That's 3 blocks from your patrol tonight, isn't it?" Ethan's hand tightened on the receiver. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lila sighed. "Something's not right. This many dogs don't just vanish. Not from the same area." Ethan glanced toward the sleeping shepherd and her pups. "I picked up a stray tonight. No tags, scarred. Protective, but calm." "You think she escaped?" "I think she was dumped." Before returning to bed, Ethan approached the sleeping trio again. The mother stirred, eyes blinking open. When he reached to adjust the blanket over the smaller pup, the mother, despite her frailty, bared her teeth, just slightly. Not in anger, in instinct. Ethan didn't pull away. He just nodded. "You're a fighter," he whispered. "I get that." And in that moment, Ethan knew he wasn't just sheltering strays, he was stepping into something far bigger. The following morning, the rain had softened into a mist, leaving a cold hush over Brookhaven. Ethan stood by the front window, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee, watching as fog curled around the trees in his backyard. Behind him, the low crackle of the fireplace was the only sound until a soft cough-like whine came from the living room rug where the 3 dogs still rested. The mother, her sable coat now clean and glinting faintly in the firelight, stirred when Ethan approached. She lifted her head with effort, eyes still alert and shadowed by exhaustion. The 2 pups snuggled tighter against her belly, one with a slight whimper, the other eerily still. Ethan's chest tightened. The smaller pup had barely moved all night. He didn't know much about veterinary care, but he knew someone who did. He grabbed his keys and made a call as he loaded them all gently into the back of his pickup, using old towels and a laundry basket padded with blankets for the puppies. 20 minutes later, he pulled into a gravel driveway lined with overgrown shrubs and a crooked wooden sign that read, "Harper and Finch Animal Clinic." The clinic was a converted farmhouse at the edge of town, a place he hadn't visited in years. Dr. Marianne Harper, 42, stepped out of the screen door before Ethan had finished parking. She was a tall, willowy woman with weathered hands and crow's feet framing her kind green eyes. Her once red hair was now a muted copper, tied back in a practical braid. She wore a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves and mud-streaked jeans. "Ethan Cole," she said, arms crossed but eyes curious. "Been a while." "Yeah. Got a case that's different," he replied, nodding toward the truck bed. The moment she saw the German shepherd, Harper's brow furrowed. "Mother? Looks like it." Inside the clinic, Harper moved with practiced ease. She spoke in a calm, low voice, soothing but brisk. She examined the dogs one by one, beginning with the puppies. "This one's weak," she murmured about the smaller pup, now barely twitching. "Dehydrated. Probably hypoglycemic. We'll need to warm her slowly, get some glucose into her." "She?" Ethan asked, kneeling beside the table. Harper nodded. "Female. Male's doing better. Probably the stronger of the litter." As Harper worked, Ethan hovered. His eyes never left the mother dog, who had refused to lie on the metal table and instead lay at the door of the exam room, refusing to be separated from her pups. She never barked, never whined, only watched, unmoving, a statue of silent endurance. When Harper tried to approach the pups with a needle, the mother stood, her muscles trembling, and stepped between them. A soft growl, barely a breath, rumbled in her throat. "Whoa," Harper said, backing off. Ethan crouched beside her. "She's not aggressive, just scared. Protective." He reached out, palm up. The dog's ears pinned back and her lip twitched, but after a moment she let out a long, shaky sigh and sat. "I think," he said, voice quiet, "I need to give her a name." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Big step." "Grace." Ethan looked at the dog, who met his gaze without flinching, because somehow she's still holding on. By noon, the little female pup had stabilized. Harper placed her in a heated nest of towels beside her brother, who licked her ear gently. Ethan sat on the floor beside them, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. He jotted down their names: Grace, Scout, Ember. Scout for the curious male who already tried to crawl out of his blanket, and Ember for the faint warmth flickering back into the fragile little girl. Harper stood at the sink, scrubbing her hands. "You said you found them near the old hardware store?" Ethan nodded. "You're not the only one. I've had 3 different families in the last month report missing dogs. Good dogs. No dig marks under fences, no broken gates. They just vanished." "That many?" "At least. Some think it's coyotes, but—" She trailed off. "Coyotes don't steal purebreds through locked fences." Ethan's mind flashed to Grace's old scar and the way her paws were raw underneath, like she'd run miles on pavement. Then the faint ridges along her legs. He hadn't noticed earlier, but now they were unmistakable. He gestured toward Grace. "These marks, what do they look like to you?" Harper crouched beside the shepherd and gently examined the back leg. "Scar tissue, old but consistent with tight binding cord or chain. And here," she pointed to the front leg, "calluses near the joint. Probably forced repetition. Overexercised." "Trained," Ethan muttered, "or punished." Harper's expression darkened. "Maybe both." The room fell silent for a long moment. Ethan stood, jaw tightening. Something's happening in this town. Someone's collecting dogs, and whatever they're doing with them isn't right. Harper nodded slowly. If Grace escaped, maybe others are still alive. That night, Ethan set up a proper space for the dogs in his den. He laid down thick blankets, set up a portable heater, and brought in a large crate with the door open. Grace, though still slow to trust, didn't resist. She nudged Ember closer to the warmth with her nose, then lay down, curling her body in a crescent to block the draft from the old windows. Ethan watched from the doorway. Grace's eyes met his once again, still cautious but no longer defiant. In her stillness was a kind of quiet permission. He whispered, "I don't know who hurt you, but I swear, they won't do it again." The next morning, frost clung to the grass in silvery veins, and a pale sun struggled to pierce the low-hanging fog that blanketed the outskirts of Brookhaven. Ethan Cole parked his truck just past a rusted chain-link gate and stepped out onto the cracked concrete lot of what used to be Milner's Lumber and Supply, an abandoned wood mill that had long since faded from the town's memory. The warehouse loomed ahead like a forgotten carcass, its roof sagging, windows boarded, the faint smell of mold and engine oil bleeding through the damp air. Ethan didn't bring Grace. Not today. He'd spent half the night mapping out reports from the sheriff's database. 5 of the recent dog disappearances had clustered around the same area, and the mill sat in the center like a quiet eye in the storm. No one had used the place legally in years, but there were signs something had shifted. Tire tracks in the gravel lot, a new chain on the side gate, and just 2 nights ago, a report from an old farmer named Redman who swore he'd heard barking echo through the trees past midnight. Ethan moved quietly, flashlight in hand. The main roll-up door was bolted shut, but the side entrance, a warped wooden door with peeling green paint, opened after a firm shove. It groaned as if it hadn't moved in years. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous, hollow, and soaked in shadows. The windows were long since boarded up, making it nearly pitch black. His beam of light swept across the concrete floor dust, debris, a few splintered crates until it caught on something small. A scrap of navy blue fabric lay near a rusted oil drum. Ethan crouched and picked it up. Dog, hair short, black, clinging to the threads. He brought it closer to his nose. A faint metallic tang, not quite blood but sharp, clung to the fibers. He kept moving. Near the back wall he found something that made his stomach coil. 4 long scratch marks carved into the cement floor, as if an animal had dug in its claws while resisting a pull. Fresh edges not dulled by time. Nearby, broken zip ties, a tangle of them in a pile. He didn't need Harper to tell him what this meant. He snapped photos with his phone, stepped back, and scanned the rest of the space. There was a closed room at the far end, once an office, probably. He tested the doorknob. Locked. But the faint hum of something inside, possibly electrical, suggested recent use. Then he noticed the floor. 2 tire marks, faint but present, leading from the main entrance to that locked room. Recent. Wide set. Possibly a van or box truck. Ethan stood in the middle of the warehouse for a long moment, breathing in the silence. That metallic tang was stronger here, mixed with damp sawdust and something else, something pungent and acrid, like old meat left too long in heat. The place was empty now. But it hadn't always been. He returned outside and walked around to the back lot where he found deeper indentations in the mud-fresh tire prints, thick and grooved. Big vehicle. Dual rear wheels, possibly refrigerated, based on the spacing. He followed the tracks for several yards before they disappeared into the paved road. That evening, back at home, Ethan didn't mention anything. Not to Harper, not even in his nightly log. Instead, after feeding Grace, Scout, and Ember, who were all now strong enough to waddle from their blankets, he quietly pulled out a small case from under his bed and unlatched it. Inside was his personal set of trail cameras, ones he hadn't used since his days in narcotics, before the quiet patrol life took over. He returned to the mill after dark. In the fog-choked silence, he moved like a shadow, placing 2 cameras, one in a tree facing the lot, the other inside the warehouse itself, tucked into a steel beam angled toward the locked room. As he latched the final casing, he paused. A sound, a faint rattle, echoed from somewhere inside the warehouse. He froze, hand on his holster, listening. Nothing. Still, the air had shifted. He could feel it. Back home, the fireplace was already lit, casting a warm flicker across the living room. The pups were asleep. Scout on his back, paws twitching in dreams. Ember curled into Grace's side, breath soft and rhythmic. Ethan hung his coat on the wall hook. As he passed Grace, she stirred and suddenly let out a low, guttural bark. He turned, startled. She was staring at his coat, fur bristled, eyes locked. She stood, tense, and sniffed at it, then growled deeper this time, not at him, but at the scent clinging to the collar. Ethan slowly removed the jacket and laid it down. Grace sniffed it again, then stepped back, ears flattened. It wasn't aggression, it was recognition. Something in the mill's air had triggered a memory buried in her instincts. "Grace," he whispered, crouching beside her. "You've been there, haven't you?" She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. That night, Ethan reviewed his photos again, the scratch marks, the zip ties, the room without windows. He knew what it looked like, he just didn't know how deep it went, but Grace did. The storm from the previous night had passed, but the clouds remained low over Brookhaven, dulling the town in a blanket of gray. At the edge of Main Street, nestled between a shuttered florist shop and a local diner that still served cherry pie from the 1950s, stood the weathered office of the Brookhaven Gazette. The glass door bore peeling gold letters and a small bell that jingled when Ethan pushed it open. Behind the counter, a woman sat hunched over a laptop, one hand stirring a mug of coffee, the other scribbling notes on a notepad scattered with printouts. Lila Jensen, 34, petite but sharp, had the look of someone who never really slept but always knew what was happening before anyone else did. Her auburn hair was pinned up in a messy twist, her glasses perched low on a freckled nose. She wore a faded army green jacket over a gray tee, and her boots were scuffed at the toes, evidence of a restless nature. She looked up the moment she heard the bell, and paused when she saw Ethan. "Well," she said slowly, leaning back, "either you've come to confess to a scandal, or you're in over your head." Ethan offered a half smile. "Maybe both." They hadn't spoken in almost 5 years. Not since the night she left for Chicago to chase bigger stories, and he stayed behind to take care of a crumbling town and a crumbling marriage. That part of his life was long over, but Lila, she was a door never quite closed. "I need your help," he said simply, placing his notebook on the counter. "It's about something bad." Underground bad. Dogs. Her brows furrowed. Fighting? He nodded once and her expression sharpened. They moved to the back office, where a wall of newspaper clippings, everything from town parades to murder trials, lined the corkboard. Ethan explained what he'd found at the warehouse, the scratch marks, the locked room, Grace's reaction. Then he told her about the camera feed he'd installed and the missing dogs across the town. Lila was quiet for a long moment, then turned to her laptop. "I've been following a group on a private forum called Wolf Chain. Closed membership. Mostly fight videos from overseas, but lately more American content. One thread keeps popping up, H8K9. It's a tag. Could be a group, a code, maybe both." She tapped furiously. "Wait, here." On screen appeared a grainy still from a video. A steel cage, chains, a blur of movement. She clicked play. The footage was raw and shaky, filmed by phone. Two dogs circled each other in a rusted cage. One was larger, thick-necked, aggressive. The other, a lean German shepherd with eyes full of defiance and fear, was unmistakable. Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's her." Grace. He stepped closer to the screen, heart pounding. Her coat in the video was patchy, her ribs visible, her ears pulled back. The crowd outside the cage shouted and jeered. Then the larger dog lunged. Grace dodged but stumbled. The sound of metal clanging filled the room. A whimper. A growl. Then the screen went black. Next to the video, someone had commented, "H8K9 Blood Series number 12. Retired loser. Barely survived." Ethan stepped back. Behind him, Grace had entered the office quietly. She must have nudged the half-open door. Now she stood in the doorway, head lowered, her body trembling slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper, older. Trauma recognized its own echo. The volume on Lila's laptop was still low, but a faint growl from the video played again. Grace took a step back, ears flat. Her eyes darted to Ethan, then to the screen. Then, Scout, still wobbly on his legs, padded over from the blanket on the floor and pressed his tiny nose to Grace's muzzle. She paused, looked down at her pup, and then, slowly, deliberately, she stood tall, placed herself between the screen and her children, and turned her back to the image, as if shielding them from it. It was a gesture not of fear, but of defiance. Ethan knelt beside her and gently laid a hand on her shoulder. "She's done with that life," he said, "and I'm going to make sure no one drags her back into it." Lila closed the video and sat back in her chair. "There's more," she said quietly. "There's a location tag embedded in the metadata of that video. It's been wiped from the public upload, but the original file stored on a hidden mirror server still has a trace. It's here, less than 2 miles from that warehouse." She looked at him, her voice steadier now. "You were right. This isn't random. It's a ring, organized, hidden in plain sight." Ethan nodded. "We're going to tear it down." Outside, snow had begun to fall, not thick, but steady, covering the rooftops in a hush of white. Back at home, Ember was finally eating with more energy, gnawing on softened kibble and curling up beside Scout without shivering. The fireplace crackled, casting a soft glow over the living room. Grace rested nearby, her head up, ears twitching, but alert now, not scared. Ethan sat with a cup of coffee and opened his laptop. The footage from his hidden camera was beginning to upload. The air that night in Brookhaven was heavy with anticipation. A sharp wind cut through the silent streets, ruffling the branches of leafless trees and casting restless shadows under the glow of the streetlights. Ethan sat alone in his truck across from the abandoned warehouse. His hidden camera feed flickered on the screen of his tablet, the grainy footage showing the warehouse's rusted door, unmoving as it had been for hours. But Ethan knew something would happen tonight. The timestamp on previous nights told him it always did, just past midnight. At 12:17 a.m., headlights cut through the darkness. A large, matte black box truck rumbled into view, its tires crunching over gravel. No logos, no license plate visible. The engine idled for a minute before the driver stepped out. He wore a thick hoodie, jeans, and gloves, his face obscured by the shadows. He opened the warehouse door just wide enough to slip inside, and from Ethan's speakers came a faint, stifled yelp. Not a loud bark, but something far more heart-wrenching. Muffled. Afraid. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The next morning, sunlight broke over Brookhaven, but the warmth hadn't returned. In the small kitchen of Ethan's home, the scent of coffee mingled with the sound of paws tapping across tile. Scout chased a piece of kibble that had rolled under the counter, while Ember nestled herself near the heater vent. Grace, as always, remained still near the doorway, her ears alert and her eyes on Ethan. He loaded the footage onto a USB stick and called Lila. She arrived minutes later, hair pulled into a quick ponytail, camera slung around her shoulder. "We're taking this up the ladder," she said. "This isn't just local dogfighting. That truck, no plates, no markings, that's organized." Ethan nodded. "Time to go deeper." While Lila prepped the footage for the sheriff's office, Ethan went door to door around the block, speaking with residents. Most hadn't noticed anything strange until he knocked on the door of Sarah Mendez. Sarah was in her late 60s, a widow with a sharp tongue but warm heart. She lived alone in a small blue house with plastic flowers lining the windowsill and a wind chime shaped like a hummingbird. She answered the door with a cane in one hand and a cat perched on her shoulder. "Ethan Cole," she said, squinting at him. "Took you long enough. I've been waiting for someone to ask." She invited him inside. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and liniment. On the table sat a photo of a younger Sarah with a German shepherd beside her, medals pinned to the dog's vest. "That was Duke," she said. "He saved my son from drowning. A good boy, gone 10 years now." Ethan sat down, notebook in hand. "Did you see anything unusual a few nights ago?" She tapped her cane. "A truck. Big, black, no lights, parked at the end of my alley. That's the same spot I saw that poor mama dog dumped a week back. I saw her try to chase the truck limping like hell." Ethan felt a chill. "Are you sure it was the same one?" "Same thumping sound, same driver profile. Tall, heavy-set man, limped slightly, kept looking around like he was hiding something." Sarah leaned forward, her voice lower. "They think we're too old to notice, but I see more from my window than they want me to." She handed him a sketch she'd drawn of the truck, the man, the alley. Crude, but enough. Back at the precinct, Ethan showed the footage to Captain Ramirez, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with deep lines around his eyes from years of dealing with the worst in humanity. The captain watched silently as the video played, then sighed. "You've got enough for a warrant. I'll call in the team." That evening, as the sun dipped below the treetops, Ethan stood with Lila outside the warehouse's loading dock. The SWAT team was prepped nearby, hidden from view. Ethan wore body armor beneath his jacket. Grace had insisted on coming. She paced in the back seat of his truck, ears twitching every time the wind shifted. Then the radio crackled. "Truck inbound!" It was the same vehicle. Same slow crawl toward the warehouse. But this time, as the driver climbed out and reached for the lock, a spotlight snapped on. Voices shouted commands. The man froze, then ran. Ethan sprinted after him down the alley. The man, a tall, bearded brute in his 40s, bolted toward the back fence. But Grace leapt from the truck with a snarl that cut through the night, barreling past Ethan. She intercepted the man near the dumpsters. Her body tensed, lips pulled back in a feral warning. He stumbled, hands raised, crashing into a pile of crates. When Ethan caught up, he cuffed the suspect, panting. The man glared up at him, unrepentant. "It's just dogs," he muttered. "No," Ethan growled. "They're lives." Downstairs in the warehouse, officers uncovered what Ethan had feared most, a hidden basement. The staircase behind a false wall led to a windowless room lined with cages, some clean, others stained. Soundproofing lined the ceiling. A generator hummed in the corner. There were training chains, whips, syringes, and bloodied muzzles. They'd found the heart of it. In one cage, a trembling golden retriever whimpered. Another cage held a limp mutt with a broken leg. All of them would be taken in, given new names, new chances. Outside, Grace sat quietly beside the truck, watching everything unfold. As an officer passed by with a jacket collected as evidence, her nose twitched and she let out a low, guttural growl. Ethan turned. "What is it?" He took the jacket and brought it closer. Grace backed up, then let out a sharp bark, teeth bared, her tail stiff. It was the scent. The man who dumped her. The man who made her fight. She hadn't forgotten. And now, he wouldn't be forgotten either. The air inside the warehouse had not yet lost its stench metal, old blood, and the cold fear of those forced to survive here. As the last rays of daylight vanished behind the pine trees of Brookhaven, Officer Ethan Cole stood silently by the police cruiser, vest fastened, earpiece humming. Beside him, Grace sat alert, her brown eyes locked on the warehouse's rusted frame. No barking, no wind. Even the trees held their breath. Lila Jensen checked her camera battery one last time. Her auburn hair was tied tight under her tactical cap, and a slim microphone peeked from beneath her collar. Though no longer a frontline reporter, tonight she insisted on being part of the team, not just to document the raid, but to see justice unfold. "Ready?" Ethan asked, glancing her way. "More than ever," she replied, her voice steely. They joined the SWAT unit assembled behind the warehouse's side entrance. Captain Ramirez motioned with the two fingers silent go. The team split in coordinated rhythm, boots crunching gravel as they advanced like shadows with guns drawn. One man used a steel cutter to snap the padlock. Another threw the door open. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Chaos erupted inside. Dogs barked, cages rattled, and footsteps scrambled in the darkness. Ethan rushed in, sweeping the hallway with his flashlight. Grace darted beside him, her nose twitching, guiding his steps. The first room was lined with crates 22 in total, some empty, others holding trembling, wide-eyed dogs. Their whimpers broke Ethan's heart. A chocolate lab, ribs showing beneath her thin fur, cowered in a corner. A Doberman, with bloodied paws, shook uncontrollably. But it was Ember's soft cry from home that Ethan suddenly heard in his mind, grounding him. "Clear this wing!" Ramirez barked. Medics rushed to begin triage on the worst cases. 2 German shepherds were barely breathing. One puppy lay unconscious, a small syringe beside the crate tranquilizer, or worse. But Grace didn't pause. Her ears perked, and she bolted down the corridor. "Grace!" Ethan shouted, following. She turned sharply and stopped in front of a section of unremarkable wall. She growled. Ethan felt along the edge, found a notch in the wood, and slid the panel open. Behind it was a narrow hallway leading to a hidden room. The moment he stepped inside, the lights from his flashlight revealed a place so vile it froze him. Blood-smeared gloves, whips, metal rods, shock collars stacked on shelves. A concrete pit in the center still held traces of matted fur and old stains. Along the back wall hung posters of dogs like trophies, and chained to the wall was a cage. Empty. Recently used. "Training room," Ethan muttered, bile rising in his throat. "Or torture chamber." Then, movement. 3 figures scrambled at the far exit, one nearly slipping on the slick floor. The SWAT team was already in pursuit. Minutes later, 2 were tackled near the stairwell, screaming curses. The third, a thick man with a shaved head and gray eyes, darted toward the alley. Grace lunged before anyone could react, cutting him off. He froze, recognizing her. "Mason Grimm Tuller," Ethan called out as he approached, badge raised. "You're done." Grimm stared, unblinking. "Stupid mutt," he spat. "Should have put you down like the others." Grace growled low, stepping forward until Ethan laid a hand on her harness. "She survived you. That's the difference." He cuffed Grimm tightly. The man winced as Grace let out one last snarl, not from fear, but from memory. Back inside, the medics tended to the dogs, wrapping limbs and lifting them into animal rescue vans. The smell of antiseptic began to replace blood, and then a sound neither Ethan nor Grace expected. A deep, almost uncertain whine from the far side of the room. A large pit bull stood in a cracked cage, broad chest, torn left ear, scars across his snout. One of the staff murmured, "That one's a fighter. Name's Titan, been in 4 known matches. Dangerous." Grace stepped forward, hackles raised. Ethan moved to hold her back, but paused. Titan didn't growl, didn't snap. Instead, he lowered his head and stepped forward, slowly, warily. His eyes met Grace's. Something passed between them. Not a challenge, but recognition. Wounds not just of body, but soul. Titan whimpered softly and approached. Then, gently, he licked the scar on Grace's muzzle. The room went silent. "Holy hell," one officer whispered. Ethan swallowed hard, tears threatening to rise. "No one's born a monster," he said quietly. "They're made. But maybe they can be unmade too." Later, as Grimm and his two lackeys were led into patrol cars, Ramirez turned to Ethan. "We'll charge him with organized cruelty, illegal training, trafficking, and resisting arrest. The dogs he hurt, every one of them, counts." Lila, still filming, looked at Grace sitting proudly beside Ethan, her fur tousled but regal in the flickering lights. "She's more than a victim," Lila whispered. "She's a witness, a survivor." That night, Grace didn't sleep near the door as usual. She curled next to Scout and Ember, wrapping her body around them. Titan, brought in by the rescue shelter, lay in a crate nearby, silent, not aggressive. Healing, perhaps, had begun. The week following the raid on the warehouse was unlike anything Brookhaven had ever witnessed. What started as a quiet investigation by a man and a rescued dog had erupted into a nationwide conversation. News vans rolled into town, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like antennae picking up the pulse of a nation. Camera crews, journalists, and activists flocked in, and at the center of it all stood three unlikely heroes. Grace, the scarred German Shepherd mother, and her two resilient pups, Scout and Ember. Ethan Cole stood awkwardly at the podium outside the precinct, wearing his standard dark green sheriff's jacket, his short brown hair still wet from a hurried shower, and his badge catching the early sun. The mayor, a short, round woman named Doreen Briggs, with silver hair and a voice like a schoolbell, stood beside him with a commendation plaque in her hands. But Ethan didn't reach for it. "I didn't do this alone," he said, voice low but steady. "Grace did more than any of us could have, and Scout and Ember reminded us why this fight matters." The crowd applauded, but Ethan was already stepping down, avoiding interviews, sidestepping photographers. He didn't want a spotlight, he wanted peace. The only attention he welcomed was from the two small noses nuzzling his boots and the gentle lean of Grace against his leg. Back home, their small cabin had changed. The once worn porch now held flower pots donated by a local nursery. Someone painted the door a soft blue. Ethan had built a larger pen in the backyard for playtime, complete with tunnels, ramps, and a shaded rest corner. But it was Grace's favorite spot, a worn wool blanket near the hearth that remained unchanged. It wasn't just comfort, it was memory. Meanwhile, Lila Jensen, invigorated by the case and the emotional outpouring, had made a bold move. Using old contacts from her time as a field reporter, she launched a small digital series titled Whispers from the Alley. It focused on rescue stories, both heartbreaking and healing, told with raw truth and tender resolve. The opening footage of her very first episode went viral within days. In the frame, Grace sat quietly in the shelter's green-lit room. She didn't bark, didn't flinch. Her body bore the evidence of survival, slightly limping gait, a missing patch of fur on her left flank, and eyes that had seen too much. In a single moment captured on film, Grace lifted one paw and placed it gently on the chest of her pup, Ember, who nestled against her. She held the camera's gaze. That image, simple and devastating, was reshared millions of times. No narration, no music, no sensationalism, just a look, and the world heard it. The clip ran on national television. Commentators debated what it meant. Poets wrote verses. Animal rights organizations printed the image on posters beneath the slogan, "No voice needed." Grace became an icon. Not a mascot, not a novelty, but a symbol. A mother, a fighter, a survivor. Lila's channel exploded. Scout and Ember, growing fast now, their coats thick and eyes curious, became the honorary co-hosts. Each episode began with Scout pawing the lens and Ember howling once as if to say, "We're here, let's begin." They didn't speak, but their presence gave warmth to every tale told. Local students painted a mural on the side of the rescue center. Grace in full stride, her pups beside her, sunlight behind them. Below, the words, "Compassion is louder than cruelty." Among the faces watching that mural being unveiled stood Sarah, the elderly neighbor who once spotted the strange van near the alley. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and a cardigan adorned with pins of different dog breeds. Having lived alone for 20 years, she found herself visiting the rescue shelter almost daily now, sometimes just to talk with the animals. "I used to think no one saw me," she told Ethan one afternoon as they stood watching the pups tumble in the yard. "But when I saw those dogs in the alley, I knew they felt that way too." Ethan nodded. "You saw what others ignored." Sarah chuckled, her voice dusty but warm. "And now the whole world's listening." In the midst of it all, Ethan received a formal letter and offer to join the state task force on animal trafficking, a promotion, full benefits, and more. He stared at it for hours that night. But the next morning the letter was in the trash. He walked out into the yard, where Scout was chasing Ember in circles while Grace watched with regal calm. He sat beside her, rubbed the scar beneath her ear. "This is where I'm needed," he whispered. "This family, this town. They need me more than a title ever could." Later that week, a second video surfaced. It wasn't part of Lila's series. It had been taken quietly by an attendee at the precinct ceremony. In it, Ethan stood quietly beside Grace as the crowd cheered. A small boy. A quiet foster child named Liam approached, hesitant. He didn't say anything, just kneeled beside Grace and touched her paw. She didn't move, but her eyes softened. That was enough. The video was captioned, "Not all healing needs words." And it was true. The morning sun rose gently over Brookhaven, painting the rooftops in gold and setting the trees aglow with amber light. Birds sang from the power lines, their melodies folding into the wind like whispered blessings. It had been exactly 1 year since the raid, and the little cabin at the end of Alder Lane no longer looked forgotten. Its wooden siding was patched and stained a warm honey brown. Planter boxes bloomed with wildflowers, and wind chimes swayed with the breeze, playing a soft, irregular tune above the porch. Scout and Ember were already up, no longer the trembling pups rescued from the alley, but strong, bright-eyed young dogs, their coats sleek and shining. They tumbled in the yard, chasing each other's shadows, leaping over low fencing and darting beneath the clothesline like children at play. Scout, slightly taller, had a knack for catching things mid-air, while Ember, with her soulful eyes and slightly crooked tail, preferred outsmarting her brother through sly detours and ambushes behind bushes. Grace, now nearly 11 by Ethan's best guess, lay beneath the wide porch awning, her sable fur full and soft once more. Her once sunken eyes had regained their calm, and the scars on her legs were mere pale reminders of battles past. The sun warmed her paws, and she watched her children play with a gaze both regal and serene. This porch was her throne. Ethan stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee, his boots barely creaking on the wood. His short brown hair was speckled now with gray, not from age, but from peace earned the hard way. He wore an old flannel over his white t-shirt and jeans. The sheriff's badge was long put away in a drawer, next to the folded letter of promotion he never answered. He handed the second mug to Lila Jensen, who sat on the steps tying her hair into a loose bun. She had grown softer around the edges in the past year, still sharp-witted, still driven, but her voice had taken on a new warmth. She wore a sweatshirt that read, "Brookhaven Rescue Haven," the name of the non-profit the two of them had built together slowly, stubbornly, but with every ounce of purpose they had left. The rescue center was just a few blocks down the hill, housed in what used to be an abandoned community hall. Now it bustled with volunteers, crates lined with fresh bedding, toys scattered like confetti, and a small vet wing built with the help of Dr. Harper. They didn't have hundreds of dogs, but every tail that wagged there wagged with trust. Ethan sipped his coffee, then nodded toward the sign just beyond the porch steps. It was a carved wooden plank, nailed to 2 posts and surrounded by blooming lavender. The lettering was hand-burned and read, "The place where a whimper behind a dumpster changed everything." They didn't need to say more. Later that morning, an elderly couple arrived at the center. Marion and George Whitfield, she with soft white curls and a bright yellow raincoat. He with suspenders and a cane carved with initials. They had driven in from another town, clutching a folded newspaper where Grace's photo still shone like a lighthouse. "We lost our dog last winter," Marion explained, tears welling as she watched Ember gently nuzzle her palm. "Didn't think we could ever open our hearts again." "But we saw what you're doing here," George added, voice cracking. "And it felt like maybe healing could come walking on 4 legs." They didn't leave with Ember or Scout, of course, but a gentle beagle named Louie, rescued 3 months ago from the same warehouse network, found his new home that day. His tail wagged like it had just remembered how. Inside the office, Sarah sat in the corner chair near the windows, now officially part of the board. She had on her familiar long cardigan and wore reading glasses low on her nose as she reviewed adoption papers. She'd taken to mentoring young volunteers and keeping track of the dogs by name, color, and favorite snack. "Louie likes apple slices, not carrots," she'd scold gently if someone forgot. Grace had become something of a legend at the center. Not just a dog, they called her the matron now. New rescues, many frightened and skittish, often calmed faster when Grace was around. She didn't have to bark or command. Her presence, her walk, her gaze told them, "You're safe now." Every afternoon, Ethan took her and the pups down to the field behind the shelter. They called it the Back 40, a stretch of untamed green ringed by forest and sunflowers. It was where they ran free, unburdened, alive. Today, as Scout and Ember chased after a thrown rope, Grace wandered toward the bench where Ethan and Lila sat, watching the clouds roll by. "She doesn't run like she used to," Lila said softly. "No," Ethan agreed, resting a hand on Grace's back as she leaned into his knee. "But she doesn't need to anymore." A soft silence wrapped around them. It wasn't emptiness. It was fullness, the kind that only comes when battles have been fought, scars accepted, and peace earned without needing permission. As the sun dipped lower, Scout ran up with the rope in his mouth and Ember tugging at the other end. Grace rose with a grunt and joined them, not to wrestle, but to bark once short and proud. Her tail wagged. That night, back on the porch, Ethan lit the lanterns, and the dogs curled up at their feet. Wind stirred the trees. Lila reached over and took Ethan's hand. "No voice needed," she whispered. And in that moment, everything was exactly where it was meant to be. Sometimes the loudest miracles arrive not with thunder, but in a quiet whimper behind a dumpster. Grace didn't just survive cruelty, she became the reason others were saved. Her story is not only about second chances for dogs, but for people too. For men like Ethan, for women like Lila, for a world that sometimes forgets to listen to the voiceless. This tale reminds us that even in a broken alley, God places purpose. That what is discarded by the world, He can turn into a blessing. That healing often begins the moment we choose love over fear, kindness over silence. Maybe today you're facing something heavy. Maybe your heart feels worn like Grace's old fur. But take this as a sign. Miracles still happen. They walk on 4 legs. They come wrapped in fur, in scars, in the will to keep going. If this story touched your heart, help it reach another. Share it. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe to hear more stories like this. And if you believe God still works through the small, the broken, and the brave, type Amen in the comments below. May the Lord bless you with eyes to see hope, ears to hear the unheard, and a heart wide enough to shelter the lost.